Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tuppas Creek Wednesday Instagram Live broadcast. I am, as always, Jason Haas. My guest this week is Stacie Jacob, who is a friend and who is also really a transformational figure in the history of Paso Robles. She was brought in 20 years ago to head what was then the Paso Robles Vintners and Growers Association. And I think oversaw some of the most dramatic growth in terms of profile and identity of a region that anyone can remember. I cannot wait to talk to her about that and obviously all of the cool stuff that she has done since. But while we wait for people to join, as I always do, I'm going to share a few pictures as to what's going on here at the winery. It's a fairly quiet time of year. We are enjoying the last of the kind of little bits of fall foliage. We've had some frosts, we've had some rain, not a lot of leaves left. Depending on where you look, it can look pretty wintry. You can also find some spots where there are a little bit of fall colors still going. You turn in a different direction and it looks again like real winter. We have not taken advantage. We've been thrilled that the rain that we got has sprouted our cover crop. I tried to get down into one of the vine rows and show you the little sprouts. The transformation from brown to green happens fast at this time of year, and it's just starting. Got one more photo that'll give you a sense of that. This is out. Like you can see this little carpet of green in between the vine rows. We have our sheep out in the vineyard. We've been having lambs. And those of you who follow us on social media, and I guess if you're watching this, you probably do, will have seen lamb pictures. So it's always a cute and endearing time of year. And then beyond that, we're just trying to get the vineyard ready. We're about to start pruning, and enjoying a little bit of a slower season. I have one last picture I'm gonna share with you, which is a picture that I love. I'm sure we'll share this at some point on social media as one of our posts. But love this picture of Sadie, my dog, and one of the willow trees that's turned color. The vineyard roads covered with straw, so they're protected from the rains, and everything just starting to turn green under this beautiful sky. So that's what things look like now. It will change by the week, so stay tuned. So I'm going to stop sharing. I am going to invite Stacie to join, and then can't wait. If you haven't met her, I can't wait for you to meet her. Okay, I'm going to accept the request now. Okay, question. Where in Europe wholesale can we find your wines? So if you go onto our website, there is in the footer, there is an international importers section. You can find out where you can find our wines there. Hello, Stacie. Sorry, I was answering a question as you appeared. That's not very hospitable of me. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's exciting to have you join me for this. This is, I think, episode 105 of these that I've done. It started in the depths of COVID, and I can't believe it's taken me this long to invite you to be a part of it.
Oh, well, I'm really honored. And I think when you first reached out, it took us some time to get this on the calendar because I think you travel a lot and I'm busy as well. So it's really great. I look forward to it. I was thinking back, Jason, I thought you and I probably moved to Paso about the same time, actually.
Yeah, I think I was here. I moved out in 2002 and you were 2004?
2004, yeah.
Yeah, I know, it's awesome. Okay, we'll get there. But I actually wanted to start because you grew up in Nebraska, right?
That's right. Yeah, I'm a farm girl from Nebraska.
And so was wine like on your family table? Was it something that had any sort of place in your life growing up?
Not at all. No, wine was really not even part of our culture. I mean, we were Midwest farmers, so we would drink milk for dinner at night,
Yeah.
and we would have a glass of milk for breakfast in the morning. I mean, milk was, very much more of the preferred beverage. But yeah, milk, iced tea. We really didn't even have a lot of alcohol in general in our family. Alcohol was something that was kind of a special occasion. But wine was not part of the culture for us.
So, when do you have like a first memory involving wine? Like when did you become kind of aware of wine as a thing?
Yeah, so I do have a great first memory. So I really like to remind people I got into wine not because I knew wine, but because I knew agriculture and I knew public relations. My first job out of college was at Fleishman Hillard, which is a international PR firm. I was based in Kansas City, and I worked for their food and ag team. And
Okay.
so there, we would get together with friends, and you would have wine, but I was still trying to understand what a
Right.
Chardonnay was versus a Merlot, versus a kind of our typical journey that you would have, learning about wine. And I was looking at, the agency was a great first experience in terms of launching my career. And I got this call one day from a friend of mine. Well, it was a friend of a friend, but she actually, her husband recruited folks in the wine industry. And I'm like, wow, that's a thing. And I remember calling her and talking to her the first time, and she's like, hey, I have this job for you. And I just said, I have no interest in moving to California. I just shut it down right there. She's like, no, 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 it's not California, it's Washington State. I said, oh, okay, well, tell me more. I don't know why I was opposed to California. I think coming from Nebraska in the Midwest, it felt very foreign to me. Obviously, I was young and naive and didn't know, but the way she expressed this job was the Washington Wine Commission. She goes, you're going to be working with both vintners and growers, and you'll be the first ever PR director for this position. So when you think about, this was in 2001, the Washington wine industry was very much in its infancy at that
Right.
particular. And so I'm the gentleman who was looking to hire me, Steve Burns. He actually was looking for someone outside the business. He's like, I can teach you the wine business. I love the fact that you know agriculture, that you were born and raised in it, and that I
Right.
knew public relations, and I could help tell the story.
And what
And so
what did you study in college?
So I studied ag journalism, believe it or not. So pretty
Ah.
interesting in terms of being focused, right?
And so did you think did you do that thinking you were going to be a writer, or did you know that you wanted to go into like the PR side of things?
So my first job, I actually came through it through photography.
Uh-huh.
I was really into photography growing up, and I actually worked at our local newspaper in Cozad, Nebraska, which was the Tri-City Tribune, my junior and senior year in college, or excuse me, in high school. Let me go back to high school. And so that's how I got kind of into it. And so they would, give me press releases, and, I would really just be transposing those, adding a little bit of a local flair to it. And then I was really involved in 4-H growing up, like really involved. And so when you're sorting those sheep, I used to show sheep at the fair in Nebraska. And so one of the things that they had in our local newspaper is every month they had a feature section. They called it the scope, and it was this, like, they would do feature stories. And so I started writing the feature story for the 4-H program that was there. They would always feature a different aspect of 4-H, and so that's kind of how I got started. And so getting into college, I was like, well, I liked writing, but I didn't necessarily think I wanted to be a journalist like day in and
Right.
day out, essentially. And then I kind of took a mix of broadcast classes, and I really liked the broadcast side. But you know what I didn't love at that time? That was the era that camera, that television camera weighed a lot. And I thought, I cannot see myself lugging that television camera around. So then I took some advertising classes, and I really liked those, but I just didn't like that I needed more soul to what I was doing. So while advertising I know is very important and it's all shifted now into content, at that time it was really writing just, copy points and more
Right.
taglines. So I'll be honest, we didn't necessarily have a PR track in college, but I kind of blended between news ed, broadcasting, and advertising. And then I got myself involved in a mentor program, and that's how I landed my first job at Fleishman Hillard, actually.
Oh, that's so cool. Okay, so set the stage a little bit. Like you land in Washington.
Mhm.
What was the Washington Wine Commission like at that point? What was the Washington wine industry like?
Oh my gosh. So when I landed there in 2001, there was 169 wineries. And my boss said, your job is to visit all 169 in the first year. And I got pretty darn close. I'm not going to lie, because it was like the goal was to be with the producers, right? It was a commission, so we wanted to keep our
Right.
constituents and commissioners, involved. And so it was as much about growing grapes as it was about understanding fine wine. And people, it also clarifying that this was Washington State, not Washington D.C. I
Ah,
can tell you many times we would get the question, what side of the Potomac River do you grow your grapes on?
well, clearly the east side if you're in Washington D.C.,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So as an East Coaster, you can appreciate that, right? The clarification between Washington, D.C. and Washington State.
Cool. So our paths intersected when you came to Paso a few years later, so 2004. Um, and you were recruited, I think, to head up what was still then the Paso Robles Vintners and Growers Association.
That's right.
Um, so I'm curious if you remember what your first impressions were of Paso when you were in the process of deciding to take this job, and then when you arrived.
Very, very clearly. So I was, again, go back to Steve Burns, who was my boss and really became a mentor and friend. He knew Dennis Collins. So Dennis, who has passed, unfortunately, Dennis and he knew each other from the Wine Institute days because they both did a lot of international marketing at Wine Institute for their various. Steve used to work for the Wine Institute. And I remember Steve calling me one day and said, "Why aren't you looking at this job in Paso?" And I was like, "What job in Paso?" And I also then had to say, well, where exactly is Paso? So that was the first thing. And so I remember sending my resume off and having a conversation with Dennis. And he said, "Well, you're kind of young." And I said, "Yeah, I can't change that. Sorry." But I said, "Here's everything we did in Washington. And I think what you're looking for in Paso Robles could be very interesting." So I came down and I flew down from Seattle. So if you go back to 2004, coming in here, we didn't have any
Right.
direct flights. There was no direct flights into San Luis Obispo. I flew into San Jose, came down and interviewed with the board members that weekend. And believe it or not, there was no hotel rooms available that weekend. And so I remember they said, "Oh, well, we're going to show you where you're staying." So they took me out to the airport. There's an efficiency apartment above one of the airport hangars. And that's where I stayed for my first 3 nights here, like interviewing.
They couldn't even find like a winery apartment to have you stay at.
Supposedly there was, I mean, again, 20 years ago, maybe they didn't have
Right.
what they have now. So it's always fascinating to me when people say, "Do we need more hotel rooms?" I'm like, "Yes, we do. And here's why."
So
Somebody out there's interviewing and having to stay in an efficiency apartment.
yes, seriously, I've thought for a long time that hotels were sort of the last thing to come to Paso. I mean,
Totally.
we like the wineries came, and then a little bit later we got started to get some really good restaurants, and then started to get some really good shopping. And there was a longer wait than it felt like there should have been before like really exciting lodging options popped up.
I would agree. I would agree with that. So, yeah, when I first came to Paso, and I remember the best thing that they did, they gave me like an afternoon off and they said, "You should go wine tasting." I said, "Fantastic." So, I believe I came out to Tablas Creek. I went to Opalo and I went to J. Lore. And I knew that I needed to make sure that the one thing I learned in Washington, Chateau Ste. Michelle was, the largest and still is one of the largest brands up there. And we worked very closely with them at the commission. So the one thing I learned was, okay, you're a big player, you need to make sure they're producing quality really at all the different tiers, right? And so it was really important for me to, just learn about J. Lore because I was like, that was the brand that I knew really coming into the mix. Obviously learned about your great history with Tablas Creek. And I was really excited. And actually, still to this day, the tasting room guy who was in there, Jeff Weisinger's father, he actually will always remind me, he goes, "I remember there was something different about you and the questions you were asking when you were in there that day." So
so so when you started the job in Paso, did you have like a mandate from the board to make specific changes, or were they just sort of like, okay, take a look and see what you think we should do?
no, it was very, very much a time of change here. So you had mentioned earlier, we were actually known as the Paso Robles Vintners and Growers Association. And so I think we kept that name for probably the first year. But one of the things that they were, this industry was growing so fast,
Right.
but the association hadn't really caught up to the growth of the industry even at that time. And so there was a big push to evolve and change. So in order for them to actually even, they did the ultimate test, they actually increased their dues on themselves. And that actually allowed them, I would say, to have a professional staff and to allow them to do things that maybe they weren't able to do in the past. They were very focused on these three festivals locally, which is, which is awesome. We still actually honor a lot of those festivals here today. But what they weren't doing is telling the world about Paso Robles wines. And so one of the big things that we started off with is we did a road show. We would go out, I think we would hit 4 or 5 markets. And this wasn't just going up and down California. This was hitting the nation. You were with us. You remember we hit New York. We would hit Chicago. We were in New Orleans. We were in Texas. And I remember counting up. We did that for about 4 or 5 years really strong, where in the springtime, we would just go on your typical road show. And, we had Justin Baldwin traveling with us. Your father was traveling with us. You were traveling with us. Jerry Lohr, the Lohr family. And we had principals, and winemakers going with us on the road. And that made a huge difference in terms of just helping people understand the breadth and what was happening here in Paso Robles.
Yeah, I mean, that really, I think it's important for people to remember, like, just what a period of growth and change that was. I mean, that period in the, like, 2000s, early 2010s, like, Paso went from being a place where even with people in the trade, I would go out and say, oh, we're in Paso Robles, and people would sort of look at me like, oh, right. What part of Napa is that in?
Right.
To then, I mean, Robert Parker writing articles about Paso Robles. Like, I mean, the change happened really, really fast. And I'm wondering, like, looking back at that, like, were there like key moments in that kind of discovery of Paso by the country more broadly that you point to as being particularly significant?
I think there were a couple things. So we started the road show. We also started proactively inviting press to come
Yeah.
here, if you recall, at that time. And I remember that because it was like we were always going. We were doing so many things that were happening. And we were also inviting the trade. Now they call it the buyer's tour. It's probably evolved from there in terms of what it's called today.
Yeah,
But
it's
we
called
used to have,
Paso Wine School now.
sorry, Paso Wine School. But you know what? It was originally called the Paso Robles Wine
Yeah.
University. I still have a wine glass that has the Wine University logo on it. And what was interesting about that is we were at that time still getting people that wanted to come follow their dream to build a winery versus getting the trade. So we kind of had to pivot that particular one. But we were trying to hit all the audiences, right? We had our consumers with our festivals happening here. We had the trade on the road. We were inviting media to come here. And now we're starting to invite trade. So we had kind of a more multi-mix happening, and that would really never occurred before in terms of the generic regionality of Paso Robles. The other thing that was happening during that time is we were figuring ourselves out as an industry, and we were starting to look at sub-AVAs. So you remember in 2007, one of the things we did is we followed really our, the what Napa Valley did, and they actually had conjunctive labeling.
Yep.
And they said, okay, one of the things we're going to make sure we always do, and Paso, we had 69 vintners and growers in the room together, really helping to carve out what are these 11 AVAs, what became 11 AVAs, what are those going to look like, right? And that was a very long process. But the key thing we did in 2007 is we got the legislation passed that everybody agreed that conjunctive labeling was the way to go. And that preserved Paso. So I go back to, I think that was a really key moment that said it will always be Paso first. And that's going to be an important component as we continue the branding and identity of this region.
Yeah, just so that people who maybe don't know what conjunctive labeling is, like, that's basically the requirement that if you use one of the sub-AVAs, you also say Paso Robles in font that is, like, equally significant on the label, so you don't have what happened in a lot of cases, like in places like Sonoma, where you had regions that people didn't even know they were part of Sonoma because they had established such a separate identity.
And what's so interesting is it was such an easy thing for us to get done because our industry was so unified and everybody was on board with that. I mean, it took a while to get all the AVAs approved. Actually, after I left, they got approved. But I was really proud of the work we did. I mean, that was because of federal legislation and such. But that was a very cool accomplishment, I think, for the industry to achieve all those things.
I loved being in that room. I mean, I spent a lot of time in that room. My dad was one of the heads of the committee of that, but he was only here half the year, so he tended to go back to Vermont and be like, okay, go to that meeting and tell me what happened.
Yeah. Do you
And
remember the meeting where he and Jerry Lohr, I remember them looking at you and at Steve Lohr and saying, we're doing this for you guys. What is it that you think that should happen? And I thought that was really powerful, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I remember it, and I do think that the fact that we decided to do it as a group and that we had just about all of the major players in the local community involved in this was so important because getting everyone on board at the front end and saying, okay, we are going to bring in scientists, we are going to listen to what they say. I mean, I remember at the beginning we thought that there were 9 sub-AVAs, and then we actually got the scientists down from UC Davis and up from Cal Poly, and they were like, no, there's 11, and we're like, okay, I guess there's 11. Like it's
Yeah.
like that. The agreement as an industry to do it and to do it once, and to do it in a way that was good for the region, rather than waiting to have um, like individual cohorts that have enough money and enough motivation to carve out their own sub AVA, I think was a really important piece of again keeping the community together as we grew.
I agree. It's something I think it's powerful. And now the cool thing is, we do get to continue learning, and there's now a story to be told with all those things. And we're going to continue learning in that, but we have the parameters in which to do that, which is powerful.
Cool. Okay, so in 2011, you left the Wine Country Alliance to found Solterra Strategies. Can you talk a little bit about what Solterra is and does?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I always like to start with the name. So Solterra is Sole and Terra brought together. And I was very purposeful in creating a name that had a meaning behind it. Because I had been rooted in the wine industry, I knew I wanted to continue working in that. At the same time, we started to see tourism, growing. So I said, what we're going to do is going to be about a sense of place. And then, of course, Sole and Terra worked because you had earth and you had sun, and you need sun and earth for things to be rooted in a place and for things to grow. And I was always really passionate. I mean, I'd been surrounded by, entrepreneurs, both at the Washington Wine Commission and at the Paso Robles Wine Country Alliance. And I was like, all right, I want to help these folks grow and develop and do what they do, but maybe in a way that I couldn't always do it at the association, essentially from an individual perspective. So that was kind of the whole premise. So what we focus on at Solterra is really storytelling. Stories is, for me, the basis of everything we do. And we do that then through traditional public relations. We do it through marketing, which now is a very broad scope, and also through strategic planning. So I think one of the things that I've also learned is working with boards is a kind of a unique skill, and working with other boards to help them get on the same page, write strategic plans, and take them through a process is something that I actually really love to do. And it's fun to be able to help a lot of regions do that now.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like one of the things you enjoy is that like working with regions, working with boards. I mean, I know you stepped in for one board that I serve on, Rhone Rangers, to be sort of an interim director, and I know you've done that in other regions as well. I wonder, like, can you talk a little bit about what it is about that appeals to you?
Yeah, I think what I always find in in boards is, a board member, you have your own business, right? You have your own thing that you're happening, but you see the greater need to move it forward. But it's becomes a full-time job in many of these cases. And so what I feel like I have that skill is I can hear what the needs are, and then we can look from the business side and say, what is it that we need to do to keep driving forward to demonstrate value to the members, as well as achieve the mission of what the organization is set out to do, essentially. Because those two things are really key. If members don't see value, then you don't have these associations, right? And so what I have found, and I think that's through working both in Washington at the Paso Wine Alliance and others, is that, not only can we help strategize, but we're able to take it down and be able to do the work as well. And I think that's something I've always prided myself in with Solterra, is we can think big, but then we can also execute.
Right, because those are not necessarily the same skill set.
Correct. Yeah. And I think sometimes, we get pushed to think bigger, which is also great. That's part of our ongoing learning as well.
So can you talk about like some exciting projects you're working on now?
Yeah. A couple of things I'm really excited about. So right now, our mix is we've got a strong foot in tourism and a strong foot in the wine industry, which here on the Central Coast, those two are very much aligned, as we've talked already about in Paso Robles specifically. So one of our core clients, we get to work with the Travel Paso, which is the destination marketing organization for this area. So I love it because we work so closely with the wine industry. We work very closely with the team over at the Paso Wine Alliance. And really what we're all about is keeping keeping the region really, really strong. So in terms of generating overnight stays in this area, you mentioned, the hotels. It's been fascinating to see the growth happen as well as what's coming.
Yeah,
So
there's a lot that's coming.
it's a lot. It's almost a little scary. If you look at the county overall, in the next 5 years, 52% of the growth is actually focused in Paso Robles
Oh
for the
boy.
county as a whole, which also means we have a lot of responsibility to keep people coming here. But I think also that what is interesting is the type of room mix. So we've got a lot of great mid-tier. We've seen a lot of like the boutique happen, but now we're starting to see more of, I'm going to say more the luxury tier product come into play, which is very exciting because that means your customer coming for the wine industry is looking at Paso Robles as that luxury kind of getaway overall.
So, I mean, talking about tourism, I'm sure, I'm guessing most of our audience is probably aware that the last couple of years have been tough for wine in California, not just California, but like wine in America. I'm curious from your vantage point, looking at this from so many different perspectives, individual wineries, associations, tourism, do you feel like this is something which is more cyclical or more structural?
It's interesting. I mean, I think it's actually both. I think we're kind of in this perfect storm right now. So, there is, when we think about the wine side, we do have an oversupply of grapes happening right now. We definitely, we all soared during COVID, both tourism and wine in a big way. So I think there's a little bit of a COVID hangover component that's happening right now where people are tightening their belts again on that particular front. But we also, like, for the first time, like the generational difference of who is and isn't consuming wine
Right.
is something that we all have to like figure out how we're going to make wine and experiences really attractive to Gen Z. Because that's the difference that I think when you talk about the typical highs and lows in the wine business, that part hasn't ever come into play in the way it's coming into play this particular time.
Yeah, I mean, this is really the first time in what, 2 generations that wine consumption is declining in the United States. So, um, I agree. I think it's sort of the whatever $1 million question for all of us in wine is how do we foster the next generation of real wine lovers?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm sure it's something that keeps you up at night, keeps me up at night, and I'm thinking about it all the time right now. And I keep thinking, the next generation, what they care about is how you're growing your grapes. They care about how you're treating your people. So all the things that the industry has developed as we think about the sustainable model of our businesses
Right.
are key points that people actually want to know more about. They love knowing that you have sheep and that you're doing regenerative farming, practices. How do we as an industry do a better job of integrating that into our culture and really kind of introducing wine not as an alcoholic beverage, but as part of our culture and part of the table?
I had Jim Treesice. I don't know how well you know Jim, the head of the executive director of Wine America, on as a guest a couple of months ago. And one of the things that he's convinced of is that like we need to be talking about wine's magic, like its connection to culture, its connection to bringing people together, its connection to history, its connection to place. And I feel like there's something really essential about that that's important, that maybe wine has not done as good a job of as it can, as it's been talking. I think in a lot of cases, it's been sort of talking to the converted. It's been saying, well, this is even more exclusive than those other things that you've been enjoying. Therefore, you should want this. But that doesn't reach outside the bubble and bring new people in.
Yeah, that's I think really, really smart. I also think, how do we make sure wine is available at all different places? So, I think about the stadium partnerships right now. And we think about like the Santa Barbara Vintners did a really cool partnership with SoFi Stadium to make sure that, Santa Barbara wines were part of like the mix. And it's like, how do we make sure that, to your point, culturally, that it's out there and that there is that surprise and it's in the mix overall.
I mean, we're going up. We've done a multi-year partnership with the 49ers, and we're going up
Yeah.
for in their whatever their owners' suites, their luxury suites. They have a program called Appellation 49 that they've been doing for, like, in its current form for about a decade, and then in a different way for a decade before that. But where they invite, I think it's 6 California wineries to pour at each game, and then also tie that in with wines that they have available for people who are in the boxes and in the suites. I think it's a cool, again, way of thinking of how do you integrate wine to these non-wine entities that are in wine country.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's what we have to think about is where, we assume that you're going to have wine when you go to a winery, right? We assume you're going to have wine at a restaurant. What else can we do to make sure wine is available at these pieces, at these other places, I should say? And also, like, how do we make it that, because I think the next generation is not consuming in the way that maybe the baby boomer generation has. And so we have to think about that, we have to get a lot more people into that pool, to your point, because they're going to buy bottles versus cases. They may not join wine clubs, but they might look at subscription models. And so their buying habits are very, very different. And we as an industry, we need to be listening to them and figuring out how we can pivot on those fronts.
So I think you're 100% right. And I'm curious, is there general advice that you're giving to wineries and to wine regions as to how they meet this moment?
Yeah, I mean it's an ongoing journey, right? I wouldn't say I have the silver bullet, but I think it's, first and foremost, like when you think about your pictures, when you think about your marketing assets, your video, it's time to really think about who you're using as the persona in that mix. And think about, who are you showing? Are you showing, I hate to say it, but middle-aged women, or are you showing young, vibrant folks coming and really enjoying wine? What kind of activities are you presenting? And so we all know that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and we're connecting all the time. So let's make sure that we're using, that visual that's really showing the direction you want to go. So I think that's first, something that I'm always reminding folks of is, show where you want to go, maybe not where you are today. Because we all think we're a little bit younger than we are these days, which is totally fine.
Yeah, I get reminded that all the time.
Exactly. But also, I think that, it's interesting. We tend to, when you think about what happened during the pandemic, and I don't mean to keep going back to that, but we did a great job as an industry in terms of online sales and creating e-commerce channels and doing what we needed to do for survival. But now it's like, okay, what else can we be doing to make sure that all those channels are working for us? And if we have a weak link, are there an opportunity? And then, we do know there's the challenge. Different software programs, the way we're managing wine clubs, do have different limitations. So it's like, what are the workarounds and how can we get through some of these pieces? So, it is a big shift that is happening. But those are, I keep telling people we have to keep telling our story, because at the end of the day, like, while we maybe feel like it's a broken record, there's somebody new that's out there that's still learning it for the very first time.
One of the things that gives me hope is that if you actually look at whatever younger millennials and Gen Z, like, they are actually ahead of where like Gen X and boomers were in terms of their adoption, in terms of their openness to wine and their understanding that like wine is a piece of what's out there. The question is, will we be able to make the case as a wine community that people should become wine lovers rather than just, yeah, I'll have a glass of wine, or I'll also have a cocktail, or what? I mean, I think that's for us the big challenge that I see is, how do we make wine relevant in people's lives in a way that we haven't had to think about in a while, because it's just kind of happened with the industry growing, the wine market growing, in a more just kind of steady way. I mean, it's just not the way that most industries work. Most industries don't have 50 years of uninterrupted growth.
Right.
And now that we're hitting a down cycle, I think it's going to force everybody to be creative in new ways.
I agree. And I think the other thing during these down cycles, it forces us all to work together and get really innovative. And I think that's one of the silver linings that hopefully we'll figure this out, and we will. Obviously, we've got people that are, and you look at the data of the past, and it's something for one of our clients for YVI and Central Coast Insights this year, we're going to be looking at how do we look at some of that long-term data to help us level set that, hey, the sky is not falling, but we need to all work together to get through these moments.
Amazing. Okay, I cannot believe that it has been a half an hour, but it has been a half an hour, and I do try to keep these to half an hour.
Okay.
So thank you so much for joining me. If people want to learn more about what Solterra does, what's the best way for them to do that?
Check out our Instagram, which is at Solterra Strategies, or check out our website, solterrastrategies.com.
I'll also put in a plug. You are a really good LinkedIn follow. So anybody who is on that platform, yes, follow Stacie Jacob.
Awesome. Well, this has been so fun, Jason. Thank you again for the invitation.
Totally my pleasure. Okay, so thank you. Thank you, Stacie, for joining me. Thank you, everybody who joined to watch. I have one more guest before the end of the year. It is a great winemaker, Louis Bariwal from Chateau de Saint-Côme in Gigondas. He's a 16th generation winemaker, which is like just amazing, and still incredibly innovative. So I'll be talking with him in 2 weeks. I hope to see you all then. Meanwhile, I hope your holiday preparations are good. I hope we get some rain. Stacie, I'll see you soon.
All right, sounds good. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.